Now, I don't want you to think I have a one-track mind, but I represent NARFE, and NARFE represents retirees. So we're back to taxes. On the current Maryland tax law, there is a bit of an inequitable treatment of public service retirees who cannot claim the same subtraction from income as military retirees. Many states recognize the value of retirees to the state economy by offering tax incentives to encourage retirees to remain in the state and spend this extra income in the state and local economy. Several states do not tax pensions. As well, there are several states that specifically do not tax teacher and military pensions. Neighbor states such as Pennsylvania and New York do not tax civil service annuities. We underpay our teachers, as one example, and then expect them to retire in the highly taxed state of Maryland. This additional spending helps to stimulate the economy as well as generate additional sales tax revenue. So there is a bit of an offset. So the question is, would you be in favor of extending the current tax exemptions of $15,000 on pensions of military retirees over the age of 55 and of $5,000 for those below age 55 to the pensions of federal, state, and local public retirees? And we'll start with Ms. Emily.
Well, I should admit that I will be depending on a pension certainly from the city government and the state government. So this is a very personal issue. I certainly would support incentivizing retirees to stay in Maryland. I think it's a critical need for the state, and it's not just about having people spending their money here, but it's also the value of retirees within our education system and across the board. It's an expertise and a value that we really can't afford not to participate in. I want to take the opportunity in this answer just to talk for a minute about Prince George's County and the importance of federal employees in Prince George's County. 25% of the federal employees in the region live in Prince George's County. It is critical to the success of the county that they are happy and that they stay and that they are supported by the county, which is why Rashern Baker has been such an advocate in every shutdown and sequestration, fighting to protect federal employees who live in Prince George's County, and that is a fight he will continue for the state of Maryland. Our delegation, our federal delegation, senators and congressmen should not be alone in this fight. We need a governor who is going to partner with them to take on the federal government and protect our employees, not just active, but also retirement benefits and protecting our pensions so that we know that they will be funded. And I want to add to that, we have a president who does not respect the work of the federal government. Has made that clear in dismantling agencies and disrespecting the work that is done. And so we need a governor who understands the importance and knows how to fight with our Attorney General, with our delegation, and also with other states. Thank you.
Well, I happen to have a pension myself. I did 20 years in the United States Navy. So I'm retired from the Navy, and I can tell you, you cannot live on your pension. So I would be for not taxing any pension, because I don't think these people have enough money just to get by, much less pay taxes on top of it. So as governor, I would do everything in my power to try to not tax any pensions at all. It doesn't matter if you're state, federal, military, teachers, whatever. If it's a pension, you're probably just barely getting by anyway, so why tax you?
I also have the self-interest of having been a federal employee on this issue, but I agree, because I do think that it is incredibly important when we're talking about people living on fixed incomes to make sure that we can allow for them to make ends meet. I also come at this from the perspective of having two public school teachers as parents who, speaking of the 84 cents to the dollar, Maryland teachers get paid 84 cents to the dollar compared to neighboring states. And so you realize that we are nickel and diming our federal employees, our teachers, and as a result, for me, this is a critically important issue because I know what it was to live in a basement apartment, living paycheck to paycheck on my father's one income, allocating $20 a week for a family of four for groceries. And yet my parents had to go into their own pockets to pay out of pocket for school supplies, like poster boards and papers. These are the kinds of burdens that we put on public employees. And particularly when it comes to federal employees, this is an important issue for me because I served alongside our civil servants and our foreign service officers. And you realize that federal employees serve nearly, I guess it's actually over 300 million Americans. And that's not even counting the effects in terms of supporting people globally. And that's where we need to stop treating employees, particularly federal employees, as piñatas, as the low-hanging fruit. So every time we're trying to balance the budget, we do it on their backs. And I know what that means because it was personal for me. And so I feel very strongly that we should absolutely not, we should absolutely allow for these same exemptions to apply to federal employees, because if we don't, we end up being at a competitive disadvantage. And I have seen and known story after story of people who have moved to Delaware or Florida or other neighboring states because we are becoming less and less competitive on this issue.
Don't ask. The federal employees are suffering, as all public employees are suffering, from what we've done to our government and our attitude towards our government. When Franklin Roosevelt was president, public employees were very honored, a very precious commodity. The government was a great thing that pulled us through the Depression. World War II, we needed the public employees, all of them, not just the military, and we honored them. But since certain Republicans, and I'm not going to name which specific presidents, but I trace it to Republicans, have been cutting government and cutting it and cutting it and cutting it. So we now lack services. We lack really good schools. We don't have the right transportation. And they blame it on the local officials. They blame it on the employees themselves after they've been starved. So that's the starting proposition. Let's get back to where we need to be. Let's get the government working well and people appreciating it. Now, secondly, public employees, including federal employees, take less money in compensation because they do get pensions, and they try to balance that. Certainly, my mother was in that category. And then when they find they're retired and all of a sudden what they thought was coming to them is only a percentage of what was coming to them because it gets taxed. So we need to balance all that. You've got a cluster of legislation that's quite detailed and looks very effective to me, equating public employees with the military, as we did in the 40s and 50s, and I think we should again. The supplemental tax exemptions that you have suggested, which in the late 90s were intended to go to all federal employees after 65, but then it got turned, as often happens in the legislative process, and applied only to elderly dependents, which is, of course, a much smaller population. So we need to work together, we need to get the right cluster of things, and we need to fix those larger issues as well.
Paul, I think what you are suggesting makes total sense, and as someone who has a pension, I'm in. One of the things that we also know is that there is a discrepancy between what's happening in Maryland and Virginia, for example, and so it's an economic issue. So while people may say and really begin and think that it's going to cost us in Maryland, no, it won't cost us in Maryland because people will stay in Maryland. And so I think that's it's a wonderful idea. We've actually been talking about this recently, about all the places where we need to look and see how government is working in Maryland as opposed to our neighbors. And one of the places that we also looked at was business regulations altogether. Because for a small business operating in Maryland, there are regulations and there are taxes that are different than in our neighboring states. And so we're supportive of that. Another area with taxes that is concerning, particularly for elderly people, is the issue of losing their home over their water bills and over real estate taxes. And this is a problem mostly in Baltimore City. We have created a plan, an overall plan for seniors that has an element of it's called Courage to Care. Courage to Care, so that people can stay in their homes as long as they can, have the services that are outside of their homes that make sense, and be able to repair their homes and do other things in their homes to keep them in their homes. I think that what you're suggesting is something that we would absolutely consider to add to our proposal about senior care. But all of these things, what it takes is having someone who has the courage to put it together, to work with others, to build the coalitions to make it happen. And that's what you have with Ben Jealous and with me. Thank you.
think that for people who have worked all their lives, paid taxes, they shouldn't have to pay taxes on money that they earn. It just shouldn't have to. So I agree with what you're saying. I think that, anything that we can do to keep people in Maryland, I don't think that you should pay taxes if you worked and you get a pension. A lot of young people, I don't know if a lot of people will get pensions the way things are going with our money, so that's going to be something to look forward to. But no, I really think that they shouldn't have to pay taxes. They pay taxes, they've worked, all their lives, and so at this point they should be able to enjoy that.
Well, you may not have a one-track mind, but I do. So this is for everyone, and it's sort of on the pay equity again. What would you do to support women's opportunities to secure fair pensions and adequate retirement income?
Back to me again.
Back to you again.
Well, I totally believe that everybody in the workforce should be treated fairly. And we don't do that now. We have large corporations pick and choose who they're going to put ahead. Even in politics, we have politicians that come up from city councils all the way to governors, and they never really cared about the people. It was all about them getting ahead. So I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it a level playing field for everybody. I don't care where you live, I don't know what your background is. It should be a level playing field so you have the opportunity to get ahead. We don't have that right now. We have people that have certain advantages and people that don't have those advantages. And all you have to do is go to inner city Baltimore and see how there's many people that don't have the advantages that people outside of Baltimore have. So I'll do whatever it takes to make a level playing field, and I always will.
I want to start by highlighting what I think is a systemic issue that relates to Diane's question. Because I do think that when you think about the fact that out of 14 federal and statewide elected offices here in Maryland, in the great state of Barbara Mikulski and Harriet Tubman, the fact that none of those positions are filled by women, meaning we have 8 congressmen, 2 senators, the attorney general, comptroller, lieutenant governor, and governor, all 14 positions are filled by men. It's the first time in my lifetime that that's the case. And this is where you realize that we are actually falling further and further behind than where we were even in the 1980s, when we had Barbara Mikulski, Helen Bentley, Connie Morella, Beverly Byron. And so the questions particularly obviously focused on fair pensions and equity in terms of income, but it speaks to a broader issue. If you want to know why we come in 50th out of 50, it's that 0. If you want to know why we have less access to health care and elder care, it is that 0. If you want to know why in a cabinet of this governor, we only have 3 women in leadership positions, even though 51% of Marylanders are women, you realize we are far, far from where we need to go. And so for me, it's a few, well actually there's several major things, but given time constraints, I want to hone in on 3. One is recognizing that we need to have not just women at the table, but at the heads of them. We need to recognize that diversity matters. Gender diversity, socioeconomic diversity, geographical diversity. Oftentimes in Maryland, you see 2 Marylands. There's sort of the 4 main Democratic strongholds, and then you see the rest of the state. We need to empower Western Maryland, the Eastern Shore. We need to bring universal high-speed broadband to all women and men, knowing that in a state like Maryland, 1 in 12 Marylanders still don't have access to the internet. We need to make sure that we provide access to financing, knowing that only 2% of private capital goes to women. These are some of the issues that I will address as governor.
No more jokes about names. Let me just say that I often sit next to Krish at these forums. Many, 30, 40, I don't know how many. And I find myself agreeing with her almost all the time. And she's hit the nail on the head in a couple ways. And I'll try not to be redundant. First of all, as to the specific question of retirement income and pensions, I think you put them through the same filter that we were talking about on wages. It's harder because they're not as visible, they're not as open. But I think you have the same principles of shining sunshine on them, enabling people to compare and contrast, and ensure through their own efforts that things are on the up and up. And that's by far the best way to run an organization. But the other thing I've learned as I've run large organizations is it is incredibly valuable to have leaders advising the person in charge or each other who have great diversity, and gender obviously prominent among them. So Chris's point about leadership is really right. We need, and my organizations have profited enormously from women leading the way and making sure that we pull everything through that filter of, is this really fair? Are you sure about that? Can we turn it upside down and look at it from a different perspective? I found it to be incredibly valuable.
Well, first of all, in the state of Maryland, our pensions are run through the state treasurer's office. Her name is Nancy Kopp. And Nancy Kopp has probably one of the most responsible positions in our entire state because she approves every contract that is given out in our state of a certain level. Nancy has taught me one thing over the years, and that is what you need to do to make a difference is to be able to sit down and come up with concrete solutions to make those changes and then bring people together. What Nancy has done over the last several years has looked at building our dollars in our economy in Maryland to give us a AAA bond rating. It has allowed us to work and have a system that looks at diversity. One of the lieutenant governor candidates actually worked in the minority contracting office for this state government. We need more people in those positions. There's no question about it, which is one of the reasons why I'm a first-time candidate this year. But I am not only a first-time candidate. I am someone who has built a system to bring more women into the pipeline for election. I founded an organization called Emerge Maryland. Emerge Maryland trains Democratic women across our state and has put people in positions all across our state, in city councils, on school boards, central committees, in the legislature, and we need to continue doing that. And I'm really proud of that. And I'm really proud that what we're talking about is building opportunity for all people, for young people, a 45-year-old potential gubernatorial candidate who is African American, whose mother desegregated a high school when she was 11 years old. We can always do it. You have to have the will and courage to do it.
I believe that if women working in the same position as men should be paid equally. I believe that women should be given the same opportunity as men. It's been too long that women have struggled and tried to get ahead, and of course, they've been left behind. They've been underpaid, doing the same job as men. So I think it's time that we do something a little different, and that's recognize that women can do the same job as men. Sometimes they do it better. So I'm in favor of women getting the same pay, the same pension, everything that men get as well.
Well, the best way to increase someone's pension is to increase their salary. In fact, public sector pensions are based on salary, different calculations depending on the level. So not to be redundant, but some of the strategies to do that the government can do, because a lot of these things are not in the control of government, but certainly, right, we can restrict employers from asking about salary history. We can audit it and make sure and equalize state employee compensation to make sure women are treated equally as men. We can also pass legislation restricting the ability of private employers to punish employees for looking at their salary history, for talking about it, for bringing lawsuits. Those are some things that government can do to try to address the wage gap. Another thing that government can do is support women entrepreneurs and have a strategy around making sure that women not in the public sector have access to retirement incomes, whether they're running their own consulting firm or they're starting their own business in manufacturing. How can government support their efforts to have an effective and sufficient retirement income? And I think that's about investing in women entrepreneurs and women businesses across the state. And one of the things that Bertrand Baker has been very focused on in Prince George's County is supporting minority and women-owned businesses in every sector, even the stormwater tax, the famous rainwater tax, the stormwater mandate. Prince George's County said, how can we make this an opportunity for job growth and for local businesses? And they have the strongest program, certainly in the state, one of the strongest in the country, and over 80% of the people doing the work are local minority or women-owned businesses. So we have to be looking at whether it's a challenge or whether it's a problem that we're facing as a state, and say, how do we turn that into local jobs, and specifically, how do we support minority and women-owned businesses in doing that? Thank you.
The next question deals with something, Jim, you said in answer to my previous question. NARFE represents, in addition to retirees, seniors. The current Maryland income tax exemption for filers is $3,200. Filers over the age of 65, however, are allowed an additional $1,000 exemption. An additional $3,200 exemption was included in a revision of the tax code in the 90s, as Jim had mentioned before, and that was intended for all seniors, as far as we know, but has only been allowed for dependents over age 65. Thus, filers 65 or older have a maximum exemption of $4,200 each, while an age 65 or older dependents exemption is $6,400. Question: would you support increasing the supplemental tax exemption of $1,000 for elderly taxpayers and their elderly spouses to match the $3,200 additional exemption that can be claimed for elderly dependents? Is the question. And who will we up to? I think it's you, Chris.
I feel like it's one of those questions of a train is going this direction in 70 miles an hour, and my math is rusty, but my simple answer to that is yes. I will tell you that when my father retired last year, he was the oldest public school teacher in the state of Maryland at the age of 80. And I realized that, in many ways, when we talk about policies, they often have these loopholes that just simply do not make sense. And time again, you will hear the underlying approach that I have to any of these issues is evidence-based decision-making. If you look at the cost-benefit analysis, if you look at intuition, if you look at principle, is there a reason that justifies the disparity? Obviously, we have touched on a lot of pay equity issues. Obviously, there's no justifiable principle. Likewise, when it comes to this question, there is no justifiable explanation. And so this is where you realize time and time again, there was a provision that should have applied that for whatever reason failed to, that gets stuck sometimes in Annapolis. And this is where, I think Jim will also say this, I'm not a career politician because part of what I want to bring to Annapolis is common sense policies that reflect the reality of what we know time and time again, which is even $1,000 or $1,500, when we're talking about tax exemptions or fixed incomes, makes a difference. And I know it because this is the situation that my parents are facing right now. They're dealing with, Medicare Part B, and does that apply, and, what exemptions apply, especially given the fluctuations at the national level. And this is, again, as I said before, where who the governor is matters.
I did refer to this earlier, and the thing that struck me as I studied, honestly, I prepared for tonight, and I looked at this. I don't get it, that if it was intended to cover all people over 65, why isn't it covering all? Now, maybe that's just the lawyer in me that needs to be satisfied, but I'll take the skills that I've developed during my life and the people that I know who are real good at this stuff, and we'll dig deep into this because it's obviously makes sense. And here's why it makes sense. Keeping people in Maryland's a great idea. But keeping people productive and prosperous and happy in Maryland is a really, really, really good idea. And in the seniors, we have people who have built the state. They've done the hard work, but they're not finished. So many of the seniors have plenty of wisdom and plenty of ability to mentor and help. We saw this at the firm. Lawyers would get older, but they weren't done. They had lots to offer both the clients, pro bono, and to the younger lawyers. We need to have our seniors really flourish. And a little bit of income along this line of exemption will pay itself back in many, many fold. I will have a person in my government who is responsible for focusing on senior issues. I don't believe in committees. When I create committees, whether it's in the university system or in Power Baltimore, the committees just said, oh, that person's supposed to do it, or not me. I like to appoint one person. It's your job to make sure we're doing everything we can to maximize what we're doing for seniors. And I will have that, and this will be one of the subjects that we'll tear apart.
I'm still back on, if the train went this way, how far are we going? Paul, thank you for bringing all of these issues to us, because one of the things that we are learning, all of us, I think, tonight, is how little issues can be overlooked and they could create big problems. One of the things that we've been looking at for seniors altogether, and we would obviously agree that you fix loopholes. That's simple. That's a no-brainer. You do that. Because I had mentioned that we have this Courage to Care proposal. And our proposal basically looks at several things. One of the things that we looked at is on combating elderly abuse and financial abuse, because one of the things that happens is that people who are frail or elderly often have been mistreated by people because they don't have the ability to deal with their finances. And so you would think that our government in the state would be paying attention. There's 3 staffers. Last year they had over 7,000 reports. That's a loophole. The loophole there is that while our government knows and recognizes that this is a problem, nobody's working on the problem. We want to normalize respite care too, so that people are staying in their homes and doing things better. And I mentioned the water and property taxes before. As someone who recently became a Medicare recipient, one of the things that became very clear, and I think all of us understand, is that we need health care for everyone. And for our seniors have this opportunity. It's not perfect by any stretch, and we all need supplemental care as well, but we need to make sure that everyone has a single-payer program.
I agree with what Jim said, and what I would want to do is put in place a liaison to ensure that seniors are treated fairly and to make sure that there's nothing going on that would affect seniors in a negative way. Once again, seniors are very important because once again, they paved the way for a lot of us, for me and a lot of us sitting here. So certainly want to make sure that they're treated fairly and want to make sure that they don't, as far as their money is concerned, once again, I don't think that you guys should pay taxes at all. You've paid into this system, you've paid taxes long enough, so now it's time for us to take care of you.
I have to admit, I'm getting flashbacks to tax law, and I'm getting thrown to very difficult and interesting questions by one of my best professors. Everything you're saying makes sense, but I want to admit I don't know enough about the context, and so I can guarantee you that I will. That we will tomorrow talk to our economic and tax advisors on the campaign to make sure that I fully understand all the implications of what you're proposing. It absolutely makes sense, but I am also reluctant to commit to something I don't understand well enough. As I said at the beginning, tax policy, tax law, the tax code, these are documents, these are moral documents. They're about how we shape our society, what we value, but they're also interconnected and very complicated. And so I want to say I'm sorry for not having a ready answer, but I guarantee that we will and can also get back to you. One of the issues that was touched on was financial elder abuse and the fact that the Office of Healthcare Quality in Maryland, which is the entity in state government responsible for investigating and responding to all allegations of physical, sexual, financial abuse in nursing homes, in assisted living facilities, and a number of other smaller categories, is I think we're just above Mississippi. Maryland has one of the worst records in the country, and that is because it has not been funded, it has not received scrutiny, and it has not been a priority of this administration. And in the Attorney General's office, it's something we've worked very hard on. We've tried to work with them, sometimes with, sometimes a little bit against. But it's a forgotten part of government, but it can't be forgotten because it's critical to the health, safety, and welfare of so many people in our system. So it is something that I'm very familiar with and will be one of our commitments as governor and lieutenant governor to make sure that we are fully funding and holding that office accountable and supporting it in its work.
Sitting up here right now, I can't see anything wrong with what you're saying, but I don't have all the tax laws sitting here either. So right now I say no problem, but we would have to sit down at the table with all these papers and figure out exactly what we can do. That is one nice thing about me as governor candidate. I have a chair at the table for anybody. I don't care where you live in Maryland, you show up in Annapolis, there's a chair sitting there. So you can come to Annapolis whenever you want when I'm governor, and we'll sit down. If me and you can't work it out, we'll get a third person at the table. Eventually, we'll get enough people there that we can make things work the way they're supposed to work. I won't make big flowery promises telling you I'll make you feel good, but I'll get the work done. I'll sit down with whoever it takes. I'll work as hard as it takes, as long as it takes to make things right. I'm not a politician, so I don't do politically correct. I do what is right. And if you look me up, you'll find out that I've done many things the right way at my own detriment, because right is right. So, like I said, right now, I don't see any problem with what you're saying, and it'd be a good idea with the way the system is right now.
Lately, the news has been full of racial profiling and just really some very distressing things. Maryland is such a diverse state. How would you work to counter discrimination and racism and celebrate our diversity?
Thank you, Diane. What's coming out of Washington since the last election has been horrible. He has provoked the worst in all of us, and the worst of us to speak out. It's been something that, frankly, it's a big reason why I'm running. I can't sit and watch this happen to my country, my state, my city. I just can't do it. And when our governor sits mute in the face of this, I can't accept that. Silence in this kind of setting is not neutral. It's enabling. It allows the bully, the hatred to flourish, and we've got to stop it. The racial diversity is extraordinarily important to this state, to the city of Baltimore. My running mate and I, Brandon Scott, bring together two very disparate ends of the Democratic Party. You look at me, you see me, you know my name now. Brandon is a 34-year-old African-American, twice elected to Baltimore City Council. We're very different, but that's not a weakness, that's our strength. We can bring together the party in all its variety and all its diversity, bring it together, give its message. The message is clear. You've heard us all. We're saying pretty much the same thing. The question is, who can unite the party and give this message energy and get it done? And that is exactly how I would respond to your question in general. In specific, Brandon has introduced in Baltimore City an equity assessment that is to be done by all city agencies. We're going to do the same thing with state agencies, and we're going to take a look at it from a racial point of view, and we have to talk about race in this country. It makes us all uncomfortable, but we have to do it, and Brandon and I can lead the discussion.
The day that Ben Jealous became the youngest ever head of the NAACP, his mother was in Baltimore for her high school reunion. It was 50 years. It was the first one she was ever invited to. She had been in the first class of black girls to graduate from a school that she had been a plaintiff in a court case to desegregate that school. It was the first time she was invited. Ben Jealous is a civil rights leader. Can you imagine what that would say to Donald Trump, to send a civil rights leader to be our next governor? The first time I met Ben, the conversation that we had was about civil rights and about social justice. Ben had recently been in front of the White House where he got arrested, handcuffed, for DACA. Because the Dreamers had asked him, having been the person who had co-chaired the DREAM Act earlier in 2012 in Maryland, they were afraid to go protest. So they called and asked Ben, and he was arrested. I've protested that same issue as the child of an immigrant. When we look at what we want to do and we talk, it's all about opportunity. We want to make sure that there's a lens on everything, and we have that lens. We have the experience from our work in social justice and in civil rights. Ben is a public policy professor at Princeton University. He's a Rhodes Scholar teaching public policy and criminal justice. The criminal justice system in our country is wrong, as is the employment system. The lenses for women, for youth, for seniors, for people of color need to be fixed, and that's what we're planning to do. Thank you.
The civil rights problem in this country is spiraling out of control. There's a lot that needs to be done, and I don't think that it can be done by one individual person. It's going to take us as a whole to bring things to a place where people will actually respect one another and live. You know, Donald Trump does not really care whether you send Ben Jealous or anybody else. You know, he'll send a tweet saying that he don't care. But we have a real serious problem when it comes to civil rights right now. And I mean, the more you look, you have hate groups, you have a whole lot of things happening. It's going to take us as a whole, not just one person. I would not even try and take on that responsibility by myself, because it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us. And, you know, it's just spiraling out of control. Right now, you know, we have the Ku Klux Klan, we have Muslim, we have terrorists, you know, we have our young children coming into school, murdered. So it's really going to take a whole lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work. And so it's one of those situations where you're going to have to roll up your sleeve and get dirty and begin to teach people differently. So yeah, I wanna be a part of that, but I'm gonna need you to be a part of it with me. Thank you.
When Richard Baker became county executive almost 8 years ago, crime was spiking, largely because DC was gentrifying and violent crime was pushing out into the inner beltway, Prince George's County. And the normal response to an increase in crime is just to increase law enforcement. And there was a part of the response that included law enforcement and prosecution resources, but it also included bias training, implicit bias training for the officers in Prince George's County, because he understood that part of the solution to criminal justice is having faith in the police departments. And that is not only necessary because it's obviously an important civil rights issue, but it's necessary for effective law enforcement. If victims and witnesses don't trust law enforcement, they're not going to come forward. There's no cases to bring forth. So that was one of the first actions he took, along with ethics reform, to send a message in Prince George's County that we are going to treat everyone equally, and we're going to be respectful of the citizens in this county. The other thing I want to talk about is my own experience at the Attorney General's office working for Brian Frosch. The Attorney General's office passed the first in the nation guidance on racial profiling for the state of Maryland, the first in the nation, modeled in part on Eric Holder's Department of Justice federal guidance document. We also created a hate crimes hotline because there was a spike in hate crime reporting and incidents after the election of Donald Trump. And so we wanted to make sure that as both the Attorney General's office, the lawyer for the state, but also the chief law enforcer for the state, that we were getting the information so that we could act on it, working with local and federal partners as well. The final thing I'll say is on immigration. Obviously, we have as a state joined the fight against the Muslim ban, but we need to send a clear message to immigrants in the state and people who may be undocumented that we are not allied with the federal government, that we are, whether it's coming in to report crimes, whether it's using our social service systems, we are not punishing people and subjecting them to the policies of the Trump administration. So there's a lot that we need to be doing in the state of Maryland that we were not seeing under Governor Hogan.
Morgan Freeman once said that if we're going to fight racism, the first thing we have to do is stop looking at people by color. The color of your skin is just a book cover. It doesn't tell you what's inside. And I can tell you that I go everywhere in this state. Anybody that knows me is traveling with me. I drive 300 miles. I drove 3 hours just to get here today. I mean, I don't shirk going anywhere. I was in Baltimore's inner city a week ago Friday at night. And I can tell you, there's a lot of poor people that are hurting out there, and there's no politicians there talking to them to find out what racism is. Politicians sit on their high horse and they talk down to the people thinking they know what's going on. We have to get out there in the community and find out what people are really dealing with. There are problems in this state. There's lots of problems. But we can fix them if we just get together and come up with approaches that will work for everybody and not just certain people. My running mate is very connected to the African American community in Hagerstown. And that's how we got hooked up with 300 gangsters in Baltimore. These people are all sitting with us and telling us what's going on and trying to work with us to come up with programs that will help these inner city kids. They're even trying to get the violence out of the city. Politicians are not doing that by giving you all kinds of talking points and making you think one thing's happening when it's really another. Until we get into these communities and start fixing things, and I'm everywhere. I don't care if it's the LGBT, I don't care if it's a small business, I don't care if it's a women's organization. I'm there if they invite me, and I'm willing to sit at any table with any person to make life better for everybody in Maryland. Okay, I'll stop there.
I share some of Sean's idealism, but I also have some realism when it comes to this issue. So when I selected Sharon Blake as my running mate, people said, well, you can't have 2 women on a ticket. And I said, why not? And they said, well, you certainly cannot have 2 women of color on a ticket. And I said, why not? And you know, some may say I am a dreamer, but I hope I am not the only one. But the truth is, you know, for me, it is really, when we talk about realism, 2 key issues. First, it's about community policing. It is why we rolled out a plan on the 3rd anniversary of Freddie Gray's death. Because we've got to realize that we have to make sure that our law enforcement officers look like, live with, and engage the communities that they are supposed to be policing. In Baltimore City, about 40% of the law enforcement officers are African American. Only 20% are women. We've got to make sure that we recruit the diversity that we need to see in the law enforcement officers. Second, we need to make sure that they actually live with the communities that they are going to be patrolling. Only 20% of Baltimore City police officers actually live within city limits. And third, we need to make sure that they're engaging with, which is why, as governor, I will incentivize having law enforcement officers participate in mentoring programs, engage with boys and girls clubs, YMCAs, rec centers, because you know that if these individuals actually know the community, you get better outcomes. Second, when it comes to immigration, this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart, because I will tell you many times over this last year, I have thought to myself, if my family tried to come today instead of 1980, would we be let into Donald Trump's America? And I know the answer is no. And so I guarantee you that as governor, I will not have a single law enforcement officer deputized into Trump and Sessions' war on immigrants, because it is not just un-American, it is un-Maryland.
This is going to be my last question, and it has nothing to do with taxes. Today, it was announced that the unemployment rate is down to 3.9%. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
However, economic growth is based on expansion. The current administration is trying to reduce immigration unless it's from Norway. The question is, how do you suggest, and we'll start with Susan, how do you suggest going about encouraging expansion, investing in expansion, but also ensuring that there are people who could fill the jobs that result from expansion?
How many of you saw the movie Hidden Figures? Everybody. Well, we're a hidden state. We're a hidden state. If you go to Prince George's County, right now, there are more programmers, people of color, than there are anywhere in Silicon Valley, by far. And what we need to do is bring more technology here to Maryland. We have a biotech industry. We have the Fort Meade. We have science at Fort Meade. We have up and down this 270 corridor. We have just NASA, all of these places where we could use programmers. We could use people with different kinds of experience. So 2 weeks ago, Ben and I spent the day with three people who are the leaders at Google, to invest in our schools and invest in the University of Maryland and Prince George's Community College and Bowie State from Baltimore, from the Prince George's County area. We also went to Baltimore. And basically what we need to do is invest in small business and invest in training people. What we've learned from programmers, and particularly in Silicon Valley from what Ben does every day, is that you only need 2 years of specialized training. So what we're talking about doing is changing the programs in our schools so that kids can graduate with a skill, with an opportunity. The same token, what we want to do is make sure, and we have a plan for this, all of these plans are on our website. We are the only campaign that has clear plans on every single thing I'm talking about. One of the things that we're talking about is making sure that we have community colleges that are working in coordination with the high schools so that kids can graduate from high school with a skill and technical ability to move forward.
In reference to expansion, my running mate and I, we've been looking at businesses throughout the state of Maryland, and we find that we've lost a lot of businesses moved away. So, and I haven't been elected yet, but anyway, I sent my running mate on a task. He's been traveling throughout the country to try and find businesses and industry to come to Maryland. I've spoken to a lot of people who just got back from Africa a few days ago. But in order for Maryland to grow, we're going to have to bring businesses here, and we're going to have to go out and find business. You can't expand if you don't have anything to expand on. Here we have some small businesses leaving Maryland. So we know that Bethlehem Steel was one of the largest in the state of Maryland, and they provided lots of jobs. So now we have Amazon that we're hoping to come here and we're talking to, but we're going to have to be more proactive in bringing big business here, and so that it will affect everybody. Everybody can work, and we don't have to complain about whether somebody's Hispanic, African American, or whatever. So that's my plan, and we're going to continue to work at that. And we do have a few companies who would gladly come, but they said they would need to talk with the present governor because of the money situation. But still, you know, that's my idea.
There's so many things to talk about, but I want to focus on three. The first is transportation. One of the critical jobs of a governor is to invest in transportation. We were far behind where we needed to be 4 years ago. We are even further behind now. So, and it's not just making investments in transportation and having a plan that affects that is comprehensive for the entire state, but it's also spurring and encouraging economic growth around those transit centers, around the transportation hubs. We've been very proudly endorsed by Governor Glendening, among others, because he understands and has evaluated the work that Rashawn Baker has done in Prince George's County around transit-oriented development, making sure that we are taking advantage and expanding our transportation system to support job growth and to support lower, shorter commute times. The other thing I want to talk about is leveraging the assets of the state, and one of the critical assets is our proximity to DC. I talked about Prince George's County having 25% of the federal workforce, but Maryland does not have an equivalent number of federal jobs. We have lost out to states like Virginia, primarily, and of course DC. So we need to be fighting for federal agencies to locate in the state, but we also need to be smart, as Frederick has been a model of, in understanding how federal institutions spur other industries, biotech, cybersecurity, defense, you name it. And we need as a state to have a strategy to encourage that and to make sure those businesses are locating here and that we are coordinating the final piece with our educational system. We have some of the highest educated citizens in the country, but we have not as a state been smart and effective about tying jobs to those educational systems. And so we have to, it's our community college system, but it's also keeping our 4-year graduates here and making sure they can understand how to get a job and stay and live in Maryland. So we have a lot to work with. We're an amazingly abundant and lucky state, but we've not been strategic and smart in terms of taking advantage of that.
Well, first, I have to beg to differ with you. We have so many federal jobs, and we don't have as many civilian jobs as we do federal jobs. We have military bases, we have NSA here. Anywhere you go in Maryland, there is some kind of federal job. Most people working in Maryland work for the federal government. I myself work for a contractor that works for the federal government. So we do not have a shortage of federal jobs. We have a shortage of regular, everyday people jobs. And the only way we're going to get those jobs here is if we start going to some of these regulations and lowering them. Our governor controls every department in Maryland. Most taxes you pay come from those agencies writing up a regulation. He can very easily go to those agencies and say, let's say small business, let's get rid of the personal property tax. You know how much that hurts a small business to pay personal property tax on stuff that they were already taxed on last year? And even if they throw the product away, they're still paying taxes on it because they can't get it off their taxes. These people can't hire people because they're paying taxes on stuff they already paid taxes on. These are the things we need to get rid of. If we start lowering them, lower the corporate tax, instead of trying to buy corporations to come into Maryland, then other corporations will come because they'll see it's fair to work here. But if we're going to sit there and pay Amazon $5 million in tax revenue, the Regency $3 million, how long is it going to be before we don't have any of those $1 million anymore to buy companies to stay here? The only real way to make this work is to lower corporate taxes so companies want to be here because they can afford to do business in Maryland. And that's what I plan on doing. I plan on helping small businesses and corporations come here because it's a pleasant place to work, not because we bought them. Thank you.
This is definitely one of those issues I'm going to be excited to go after Hogan about during the summer and the fall. Because in 2014, when he ran on slogans about Maryland being open for business. But in 2018, we're going to hold him to the track record. Because right now, though the unemployment rate nationwide is low, in Maryland, we're 29th, meaning we're at the lower end of the middle of the pack. And that's so far from where we need to be. So for me, it's about 4 areas. First, we've got to invest in infrastructure. It's important to note that we're here in Frederick County, where 40% of employees are commuting outside of the county. So this means addressing the fact that we need to invest in public transit, expand the MARC train up to Hagerstown at the very least. We need to make sure we are smart about reversible lanes, ride sharing. We need to make sure we guarantee universal high-speed broadband across the state, knowing that it is a public utility that affects education and our economy. Second, we need to make sure that we are investing in expanding biotech, cybersecurity, IT, not just along 270 and 95, but across our state. And part of that means that we need to commercialize the incredible cutting-edge research that is happening in fantastic universities like the ones at Hood College, UMBC, College Park, Hopkins. Third, we need to make sure that we're supporting small businesses, because I appreciated this question, knowing that recently you've seen headlines where our seafood industry is going to have 40% less than the employees we need, because immigration and visas are affecting our ability to put employees into the jobs that we need to fill. But likewise, I hear from employers across the state who say we have jobs, we don't have employees who are trained. That's why I want to work with community colleges to make sure that our children have the skills to get into the jobs that we have. And finally, I want to support trade, because this is where Maryland has an advantage in terms of proximity. It is not just about supporting the federal employees, but actually making sure that when trade delegations come to DC, that we recruit them to come to Maryland so they invest in our state.
Your question is right on the money. I've learned through my career that if you're not moving ahead, you're probably falling behind. And that's exactly the point of the question. We've got a relatively low unemployment rate, but where are we going? And we need to grow. We need to grow the economy. We need more jobs, a better tax base. I have published, just recently, published a full economic development plan that focuses on several elements. Let me summarize them for you. I can't do it all in 2 minutes, but I can come close. First, public education, which I talked about earlier, across the board, particularly vocational training. We need, and I will challenge, the business community and the education community, which I'm very much a part of, to get their act together, to align what we're teaching in high schools and community colleges and elsewhere, to align what we're teaching with the jobs that are there to be had. We need that kind of alignment, and we need a strong vocational education system throughout the state. Second, we need infrastructure. Certainly transportation, chief among them. Chris is right, 40% of people in Frederick County commute down to DC. 68% of them commute in cars. And why? Cars are more attractive. We don't have a good train system up here. We don't have a good mass transit. Mark has the semblance of it, but it needs to be very much improved. You need faster trains. You need them more often. You need them to be nice enough to travel in. So infrastructure is a big part of it. Third point, only 2% of a state's jobs, and this is true in Maryland and throughout the country, only 2% come from companies relocating into your state. To wait or even look for companies to relocate is not an economic development plan. What we need to do is invest in Maryland, invest in its startups. When I was chair of the university system, in the 4 years, we created 450 new startups based on the innovation, and we need to invest in small businesses, as I did in the empowerment zones. Mm-hmm.
First of all, I would like to thank our timekeepers for keeping such a good time. Latanya, Walter, and Valencia Campbell, thank you so much. And now we will conclude by your final closing statements, please. And well, number one was
No, because I asked the last question.
Oh, is that what happened?
No, it was according to the numbers. You picked number one.
First, even with a name like Vignaraja, I get to go first. Thank you so much for hosting this. Thank you for coming on a Friday night. We covered a lot of ground. I definitely honed my math skills, so I really appreciate this conversation. Obviously, this is the tip of the iceberg, so I do hope that people go to www.krishformaryland.com if you want to learn any more about our policies. We just rolled out a Southern Maryland plan, and we have rolled out a Western Maryland regional plan to get more details. The conversations that we have had in terms of the issues we've talked about only matter if we are able to get a Democrat in office. And the conventional wisdom out there is that no man can beat Larry Hogan. Well, I'm no man. important because when we think about what happened in 2014, 296,000 Democrats failed to show up. And the majority of them were women, minorities, immigrants, and younger voters. We're expecting about 65% of the turnout in the primary and the general to be women. And so we have been crisscrossing this state tirelessly, winning debate after debate, straw poll after straw poll. And yet, every now and then, I get the question, well, you don't look the part. Senator Mikulski said to me, you'll get that question sometimes. And you respond with, well, this is what the part looks like. And that matters because we are meeting here in Frederick, which experienced his historic sweep of Democrats winning every seat because we had politicians that gave people a reason to show up. So my campaign is about that affirmative, positive agenda, talking about healthcare as a universal human right, talking about education as a guarantee for all of our children to realize their potential, talking about making sure we protect our employees who have committed their life service to public service or the private sector. Let us make sure that we see the renaissance of Maryland together, because we can do it not just in our lifetime, but in the next couple years. I hope that I have earned your support. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. I think by being here, you see what is at issue. We agree pretty much on the policies that should be pursued. The two questions that are paramount are, first, who can get these things that we agree on done? And secondly, who can beat Larry Hogan? Those are the two questions. And you can see by being here that while we value the same principles and pursue the same goals, we're very different. We come with different backgrounds, different experiences, different plans and thought processes. And that's what makes for an election. So thank you for being here, and thanks for giving me, Jim Shea, a chance to tell you about myself. I think I have demonstrated through my career that I can get things done. I think I've demonstrated through the plans that we've published in education and transportation and economic development that I've got good ideas, concrete ideas that make sense, that can be implemented. I think I've described to you Brandon Scott, who is a terrific young leader of a generation that's not interested in doing things the same old way. Brandon, in his 34 years, has gotten an enormous amount done, particularly in public safety in Baltimore City. So I think we are the candidates that can answer that question. The second question is, Larry Hogan, can you beat them? And here, Brandon and I, the unifying elements that we bring to the party, we appeal to a very broad spectrum of the party, from the moderate, business-oriented through the very progressive. We share the same values, we're after the same things, we do appeal, I think, quite broadly. And it's that kind of broad spectrum that Larry Hogan won't be able to handle. I'll match my business record against his any day. And I think when we match our records of experience and what we can do for Maryland, we will beat him. Thank you for having me here tonight. I hope you'll support us.
I got number 6, so I was waiting. Tonight you've heard from a lot of issues. You've heard a lot of things. And the one thing that I want to make really clear is I got into this race with Ben Jealous, having worked on a campaign since I walked into Mike Barnes' campaign office in 1982. I was pregnant, and I had a two-year-old, and now that 2-year-old has a 2-year-old, and the boy I was pregnant with has a 1-year-old, and I have 3 grandchildren. It's been a long road. It's been 35 years. And in that 35 years, I've seen a lot of candidates. But the only candidate that I sat down with ever that said, come with me and let's go on this journey together, was Ben Jealous. Ben is a visionary. Ben is probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. He is someone who has come past challenges that his family had to withstand. I told you about his mom and her school. His grandmother came to Maryland in 1941 and worked at Planned Parenthood. His grandfather on the railroad. And that grandmother is now 101. And she said to Ben at one day, "Baby, you can't solve half a problem, because then you still have a problem." Well, we're in a situation in our state where we have lots of problems, and you can't just go halfway. That's why the teachers are with us, because we're going to go all the way with education. That's why the healthcare workers are with us, because we're going to make sure that we move towards a single-payer plan. That's why working families across our state have invested in us. We have more donors than any other campaign across this table put together. And we have more Maryland donors, and all of our donors are individuals just like the people in this room. Thank you.
I just want to take this opportunity to answer Jim's question. You said, who can be Larry Hogan? I can. I can.
I'm sure you can.
I can. Yeah. I'm not a politician, but I am someone who felt like it's time that we bring something new to Maryland. Politicians, they only bring political agendas, and they forget about people. But I want to remove the political agenda and make this a people agenda. I want to be a servant to you. I want to be someone who will work hard for you. I bring innovation. I bring new ideas. And not only that, I'm intelligent. I'm smarter than Larry Hogan. And I just believe that, people are tired. People are really tired. We've been traveling to get people to come out and vote. People are tired. They're tired of politicians. They're tired of the way that things are being run. It's time for something new. So if you really want to see a change in Maryland, I'm going to ask you to vote for me. I want to send a message to politicians. We're no longer going to accept what they decide they want to do for our lives. So I'm asking you to at least consider me, but I can beat Larry Hogan.
I want to thank you again, BPW, and NARFE for hosting this and for the phenomenal questions tonight. I will always remember this forum as the tax forum, because there is no other that has had as many tax questions, and I appreciate it. The reason I'm running is not because I admire what Rashawn Baker has done in Prince George's County. I do. I admire it very much because I love good government. I love good policy. I love innovation. I love that he's made Prince George's County the leader in recycling and clean energy use. I love those things. But I would just be a supporter and an observer if that were all it was. I joined the ticket because of who he is, because of three things: his heart, his sense of urgency, and his ability to get things done. And it's a sense of urgency that keeps him up at night, thinking about vacant buildings and tearing them down, making sure that school children are getting adequate education. It's a sense of urgency that he drives and supports his staff with every day. It's a heart that encompasses everyone that he represents, all the people across the county and soon, hopefully, across the state. But it's also his ability to get things done, because I have seen many people with good intentions, very good intentions, good ideas, founder in the process of getting bills passed in the General Assembly, crafting budgets, making hard choices. And Maryland, we are coming to a crossroads. We have been slipping further and further behind where we need to be. We have hard choices ahead. We have really big decisions. Sometimes I'm asked, well, does it really matter if Hogan gets a second term? Why does it really matter? And one of the things I say is there are 4 decisions that will be made in the next term that will affect Maryland for generations. 2 are around school funding, the Kerwin Commission and the Knott Commission, operational and capital funding. 2 others are the census. We will not be properly counted by the Trump administration. In fact, Rashawn Baker, along with the National NAACP, have sued the administration to address that fact. We have to count ourselves, because that addresses every funding formula from the federal government. And the final thing is redistricting. It matters to have a governor with experience, who knows how to work with the General Assembly, who knows how to pass budgets, who knows how to make hard decisions. And I thank you very much for having me here tonight. Thank you.
Well, I'm kind of in a different boat than these guys are in. I'm already on the ballot in November running for governor. These guys are trying to win in June to be on that ballot with me. And I have to tell you that you have a hard choice here between these folks. I also want to ask you all a question. Ben Jealous was brave enough 2 weeks ago to say that he will debate me if he wins in June. Will each of you make that same statement that you'll debate me in June if you win in June? Because it's really important that the people in Maryland see who is actually running for governor. In 2014, Larry Hogan refused to debate if they allowed me to debate with him. And then they came out with, well, you didn't poll high enough. But I did poll high enough, they just changed the polls. So it's important that when the debates come around in June, the people of Maryland get to see everybody running. And that includes the Green Party, because they have a candidate running also. Now, you should also realize that there's people that aren't here that are on the ballot in June. And you should realize that they didn't take the time to come and answer your questions. And you should take that into consideration. But when you vote in November, stop worrying about parties and start worrying about who is the best person to lead this state. Because if you keep voting party, the Democrats have been running the legislature for the last 25 years, and we haven't gotten any better. So party is not the answer. If you think one of these people is better than me, then by all means, you should be backing them. But if not, you shouldn't be afraid to vote for me just because I'm a libertarian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we will bring up our two presidents for their concluding remarks. As the first vice president of the Maryland Federation, it has been my true honor to have such an astute, please give them all a round of applause.
Thank you, Suda, for the wonderful job you did this evening, and everyone else. I do want to thank all the candidates. I must say I was pleasantly surprised to hear some of the answers that I did hear, and I hope it was very informative for all of you too. I just basically want to say thank you so much for at least coming tonight and speak to us, because there were some that did not. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you.
I, Gary Roundtree, Dr. Roundtree Sr., I'm also encouraged by the diversity of the speakers that came here and to participate in this forum and this lively discussion that we just had on taxes and equality. I am also proud to have been part of this historic process that just brought us all here together today. And I am going to conclude this with calling on all of our NARFE members, BP members, and APUW to let's join forces to continue to be a voice for the voiceless. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming, and this concludes our forum for BPW and NARFE.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Thank you. 30 seconds.